Very good afternoon to all of you. I am A.G. Ramakrishnan from the Medical Intelligence and Language Engineering Laboratory of the Indian Institute of Science. I am an engineer by training. I am not a doctor or a yoga specialist. Like Dr. Ramajayam told us yesterday, I started practicing yoga and pranayama, saw its benefits, and as a researcher had the curiosity to find out why it gives us the kind of effectiveness that it gives us. And that is the origin of this talk. If you look at most of the yoga researchers, they mainly look at the benefits that yoga practice, whether short term or long term, gives us. But my approach to this talk will be looking at what are the mechanisms, physiological mechanisms, cardiorespiratory, neural, and endocrine mechanism behind the effectiveness of the pranayama practices. I will also define what I mean by the signal to noise ratio of the body and the brain. See, as an engineer, I look at the body as a system with certain inputs and certain outputs and certain amount of efficiency. When you look at a motorbike as a system, petrol mixed with air at a particular ratio is a desirable input. If kerosene is there in the petrol, then it is an undesirable input which I call the noise, and the system efficiency reduces. Similarly, if you want to cross Hosur Road in the afternoon, you are trying to cross is the signal, and the heavy traffic on the road is the noise, and when the noise is so high, your efficiency is poor, you can't cross the road. Suppose you want to do it at 3 a.m. in the morning, the noise is almost zero, and you are able to easily cross the road. So when you come back to the body as a system, there are two key inputs: food and the oxygen that we breathe in. Too much has been talked about the food and almost nothing about the other key input, that is the oxygen, which is a crucial input to the body and the brain. So this talk is about the other key input to the body, which is oxygen. And in that context, what is the definition of signal to noise ratio and how pranayama increases the signal to noise ratio as far as this aspect of the body is concerned. Small view of the Indian Institute of Science from where I come from. Thanks to the Jamshedji Nasarwanji Tata, who gave the money to start this institute more than 100 years ago, and also the then Maharaja of Mysore, who gave the land. So what I am claiming is that, so the question I have is, can pranayama protect you against the COVID-19 infection? Let us start with the interesting topic. So now everybody is interested or worried about this. So I have a statement, I make a statement that Bhramari Pranayama may have a potential to especially prevent this virus from replicating inside the body. So again, let's not accept our this is my hypothesis, and we need to really study this system systematically and see whether it is true or not. It could be either. And in this process, I'm also, because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a biochemist, but I'm somebody who is extremely committed and passionate. So I want a team, people who are interested in similar things who can join me, and people who are also interested in funding such research. So now, why do I think that Bhramari Pranayama might help? So nitric oxide is an important signaling molecule, and it signals between the cells. So this nitric oxide, we'll come to the connection between nitric oxide and breathing in a moment. Right now, you just look at nitric oxide as a chemical, it has an effect on inhibitory effect on virus infections. It inhibits, and this is from a paper which was published in 2005. As you know, 2003 had a bad virus called SARS virus, and that is also a coronavirus, they called it. So at that point of time, they have done this research, and this is published in the Journal of Virology, which studies about viruses and so on. And they said that this virus replication cycle is inhibited by nitric oxide. Inhibited means it prevents and does not allow the virus to replicate, which means even if you get that, it will not multiply and get you into problems. But of course, similar thing has not been done for the new novel coronavirus, but I think it is a very important thing that we need to do. So nitric oxide also has an effect that it reduces the blood pressure by vasodilation. Vaso means vessel, blood vessel. Dilation means it increases the volume of the blood vessel. And I have two papers on this, one published in 1992, which says nitric oxide and in blood pressure regulation. Another says nitric oxide is a vasodilator reversing hypoxic pulmonary vasoconstriction. If you know recent papers, they are talking about silent hypoxia killing some people in Kerala especially. So hypoxia is basically reduction of oxygen in the blood. And this is occurring without any warning, they are saying. And this nitric oxide is exactly, they are saying that it is reversing that hypoxic condition. Very interesting studies. And that is 2019, just maybe 9 months back. And what is this connection of nitric oxide to the body? So these sinuses are there behind your nose. These are called the parasynal nasal sinuses. They are a group of 4 paired air-filled spaces that surround this nasal cavity, and they produce nitric oxide. This was known only 10 years back. Everybody knew that they produce, they humidify the air and heat inhaled air, increase the resonance of speech, and also serve as a crumple zone to protect vital structures in the event of facial trauma. All of that was known long ago, but the nitric oxide connection is hardly 10 years old. They realized that they also release nitric oxide. Okay? And then this is the most interesting thing. Humming multiplies nitric oxide. I was telling you about Bhramari Pranayama. What is Bhramari Pranayama? Bhramari is basically, when you inhale and when you exhale, you make a humming sound like So the basic thing is about creating a humming sound and which vibrates your skull. And there are variations to that, like, some people say, you close your eyes and close your ears and then the vibration is better filled. Like that. Again, I am not an expert in that, so don't go by this thing. If you want to learn any of these things, please go to a good yoga teacher. So this Bhramari, they have shown, this is a paper published in 2002, and subsequently the same group in Sweden, they have published in 2008. I'm still there following, many studies related to that. And what interesting thing they said is that this nitric oxide increases 15-fold during humming compared with quiet exhalation. And these are people who have no connection to yoga or meditation or pranayama. The connection is made by me. And all they studied is, they asked people to breathe normally, and they asked people to breathe with humming, and they measured the amount of nitric oxide that comes out of the exhaled air. And they found that the amount of nitric oxide when you are humming increases 15 times. So which means that whenever we are doing this Bhramari Pranayama, so we are sending 15 times the nitric oxide into the body, into the lungs, and probably it will also cross the blood-brain barrier and may be able to go to the brain. So that is the interesting thing about Brahmari pranayama, which increases nitric oxide, and nitric oxide has an effect of preventing the SARS coronavirus from replicating, and it's very important that somebody does the research whether a similar thing is done for this. So now moving on, I already told you that why yoga gives all the effects. The mechanisms are not studied much. So that is partly the interest of this talk. And let me also go back to the signal to noise ratio. So the concept of signal to noise ratio was originally occurred in the electronics and communication area, where I did my bachelor's. And see, you know, electrical signals that come through TV, radio, your mobile, and satellites, and so on. And when you are talking through your mobile, suddenly, you know, some unwanted thing comes in. So somebody else is talking, and that is also coming in. So that is also sound, but that is not signal. You consider that as a noise because it's an interfering signal. Similarly, when you are in a marriage party, you know, you are talking to somebody, and there are so many other people talking to their own friends and other people, but that whole sound becomes an interfering sound. And so when there are no interfering sounds, then you are able to hear much better. Your efficiency improves. Another example of signal to noise ratio. You are trying to cross an important road, let's say Hosur Road. And if you are trying to cross the road at this point of time, it's very difficult, almost impossible because of that amount of traffic. So the signal is that you are trying to cross the road. Noise is all other vehicles going through the road. And the same thing now you want to do it at 2 a.m. in the morning. Mostly I assume that road may be relatively free then you will be able to even hum your favorite song and cross the road, get some nitric oxide also. So signal to noise ratio in electronics and communication is defined as the power of the desirable signal to the power of the undesirable signal. So in my opinion, yoga, pranayama, meditation, they increase the signal to noise ratio of our body, mind, and the brain. In other words, our own signal to noise ratio as a human being. Now, how do I define the signal to noise ratio of the brain or the body? We'll see that as we go along. So the role of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Yesterday, Dr. Ramajain said that carbon dioxide also has an important role, especially in, when you are holding the breath. But I'm not an expert on that. I'm only going to look more on the oxygen. So there are also certain functions played by carbon dioxide, which will be the topic of another talk when I learn enough about it. So our body is a colony of 130 trillion cells. It may be slightly less, maybe 80. There are different numbers. Nobody has counted it. They estimated it. And this 130 trillions of cells, they are working as a single unit with total cooperation and understanding. So it's actually a universe in operation because each cell has its own functions, it has input, output, everything. And all these cells and your body itself has been put together systematically from the food that we take and the oxygen that we consume. All of us started from a single cell from our parents, and the rest of it all from the idlis and dosas that we consume and the oxygen that we consume. 99% of the body mass is by only the 6 elements: oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. And oxygen is the leading one, you can see. That is required by each and every cell of the body for our metabolism. That is the function by which it generates energy. And the brain itself consumes 20% of the oxygen that we intake. The weight of the brain is roughly around 2%, they say, but it consumes the majority of oxygen. And all of us here are brain workers. Our brain is a main input for us. And you know how crucial it is to get enough oxygen, which powers our brain. And carbon dioxide, as far as this talk is concerned, is the waste gas produced when carbon is combined with oxygen as part of the body's energy making process. And circulation of the blood which carries oxygen to the body, and respiration, which takes oxygen from the environmental air. These are the two things that actually exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide between the body and the air around. So I'm going to define signal to noise ratio in this context of breathing as the ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide in the blood. Why is it important? You might have all heard about this pH when you are in school. You might have studied, or your PUC. P stands for partial pressure, H stands for hydrogen. So this is partial pressure of the hydrogen ion when it is in a solution. So when there is carbon dioxide and there is enough water in the body, these two combine together and create what is called the carbonic acid. And in water, it is separated as these two ions, hydrogen ion and the bicarbonate ion. And as carbon dioxide increases, so does the hydrogen ion concentration, and the pH reduces, because pH is defined as a negative logarithm of the hydrogen ion concentration. Now the pH value varies from 0 to 14. 7 is the pure water's the pH, and the normal range of the blood is slightly above 7. It is 7.35 to 7.45. So it has to be alkaline. And if it goes below 7, acidic pH is bad for health. So I define signal to noise ratio in this, so it is my definition, as the ratio of partial pressure of oxygen to that of carbon dioxide in the blood. So now we will look at what increases the oxygen, and so which means indirectly the signal to noise ratio in the blood. Normal breathing, we are not even aware that we are breathing. That is how it goes on when you are sleeping. It's involuntary. Only inhalation is active, some muscles are involved, and exhalation, you don't have to do anything. So when you blow a balloon, you have to do some work. When you just release it, the air comes out because of the recoil, and similarly is our normal breathing. So the expiration is passive due to the recoil of the thoracic chamber. Now, when you are inhaling, there are 23 muscles, which means 11 pairs of external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. And when you are actively inhaling, in some of the yogic postures, some of you, if you have done yogasana, so you are asked to, raise your shoulders and do, more active inhalation. And that time there are other 6 muscles, which are called the accessory muscles, come into picture. And then similarly, when you are doing active exhalation, try to, completely exhale, they say, And then there are 2 more sets of 11 pairs of internal and innermost intercostal muscles. They are pairs on left and right side. So there are totally 44 muscles come into picture. And then if you further forcefully exhale, like you are doing in Kapalabhati. So when you do Kapalabhati, you are forcefully exhaling from the abdomen. So there are 4 more muscles get involved. So you can actually go from the 23 muscles of the passive breathing to 89 muscles when you are actively inhaling, deeply inhaling, and forcefully inhaling, consciously inhaling, attentively inhaling. So that is the possibility. So you are just sitting and you are doing some active breathing, and you can involve 89 muscles, which is 14% of all the muscles in the body. So that kind of an exercise. Not only this muscles, 17 spinal nerves are involved in that. So these are some muscles. I will not get into this, and so let's go directly into the nerves. So this is your spinal cord. So all this spinal nerves, C1 to C3, C3 to C5, T1 to T11, T6 to L1, all of them are involved in controlling those 89 different muscles. You can see that only a few spinal nerves are not actually involved. So that is the kind of importance the nature or the God or evolution has given to the breathing. And the control center for this in the brain is there in the medulla oblongata and the pons, what they call. And this I have taken from the Khan Academy video. Now, so in addition to those 89 muscles and the 17 spinal nerves, there are chemoreceptor, that is chemical sensors which are there in the pons and the medulla, and they sense the carbon dioxide levels. So based on this thing, they can increase, decrease, the breathing speed and the heart rate also, and the pressure also. So there are also chemosensors in the aortic body, and they sense oxygen, carbon dioxide, pH, and they maintain the cardiorespiratory homeostasis. So these are fed back through different nerves. Will not bother about it. And so together with all of this and respiratory sinus arrhythmia, I will tell you what it is. The whole thing, just deep breathing is an amazing cardiac exercise. So in normal passive breathing, and what is the level of oxygen or air that you can change due to active breathing? The normal breathing, when you are not even aware, the tidal volume, that is the air displaced between inhalation and exhalation, is around 500 ml for an adult, or more specifically, it depends on the body mass, 7 ml per kg for adult. With deep breathing and with maximal effort, you can reach the vital capacity, that is the maximum amount of air that can be moved in and out of the lungs, which is close to 5 liters. So if you take this as 5 liters and this is 500 ml, it is 10 times or 900% increase in the effectiveness of breathing, or the volume of air displaced per breathing cycle. You can actually give enough oxygen to your brain and all your trillions of cells. So now let's look at what is this respiratory sinus arrhythmia. This respiratory sinus arrhythmia is a physiological phenomenon, and it connects very closely your respiratory system and the circulatory system. And this is not only for human beings, all the animals that have a backbone, vertebrates, they have it. So what has to do, when you inhale, the heart rate goes up. When you exhale, the heart rate goes down. So they think that it is probably because the body wants to increase the effectiveness of the perfusion of the taking of everything to the body during inhalation by increasing the heart rate, and it wants to save energy expenditure during exhalation. So every time you are breathing in and out, your heart rate is increasing, decreasing. That means actively you are exercising the heart, and when you do it more actively with active breathing, in my lab I have seen that the heart rate can be changed up to 20 beats per minute. Maybe good yogis can do much more. So you can see what an amount of, our average is around 70 beats per minute, and on that, this is almost 30%. So that is the amount of exercise that you can give to the cardiac muscle. So you can, together with all this, you can see the muscles, the spinal nerves, all the sensors that are involved, and the heart itself going through heart changes. So it's an amazing cardiorespiratory exercise. That is the pranayama. Now there are other connections. Some of them also is my extensions. So this is based on one of the papers recently published by one of my close friends, Professor Srinivas Chakravarti in IIT Madras. They actually modeled what is known as the basal ganglia in the brain, and the cells in that, which are called SNC. Some names are there, let's not worry about that. So these cells are basically what causes the Parkinson's disease in old people like me. So you would have seen what is Parkinson's disease. They have some tremors and they cannot control it very well. So it has been proposed that the primary factor that causes the degeneration of these neurons in this basal ganglia, the reason is their high metabolic requirements. They are one of the most vulnerable and energy consuming neuronal clusters due to their structural and functional properties. So based on their models, they said that this may be initiated by weak excitotoxicity mediated by energy deficit. That means they demand too much of energy and there is not enough supply. And that is what they said. And what I'm extending is, if you have good breathing, not only oxygen comes in, but later I will show you, there are also papers that say that breathing can actually increase and decrease, or it can pulsate the flow of cerebrospinal fluid, which means the equivalent of blood in the brain. So it can actually pump in sufficient nutrient through the blood into the brain. And if there is sufficient energy, you have seen already, there are enough feedback mechanisms, sensors, and so on, and the brain will give what is needed for whether it is SNC cells or whatever the other cells. So this is what I think. So these are that SNC cells deep down into the brain. So this is the paper I was telling you about. Breathing modulates the cerebrospinal fluid, published in 2017 in the Journal of Neuroscience. What it says is that breathing is able to modulate the circulation of cerebrospinal fluid, or the equivalent of the blood in the brain. And this has far-reaching implications, because I can control how much is the speed or the velocity of the cerebrospinal fluid intake into the brain. And this has connections to Alzheimer's disease, because people have shown that improved circulation of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain results in the effective elimination of metabolic waste products such as beta amyloids from the brain, thus reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease. So boosting the cerebrospinal fluid has been linked to improvement in cognitive function and reduction of cognitive concerns in the elderly. Thus, deep breathing increases, in this case, the signal to noise ratio of the brain. So this is a conjecture. This is known from the paper. So I'm saying that good breathing, if you do it from the young time, it may reduce the risk for Parkinson's. So one of the things that we can check these things is, first, you should look at all the Yogasana teachers, not the Swamis. They talk of yoga, some of them may not be doing it. I'm talking about people like B.K. Iyengar and so on, or currently who are the teachers who actively practice this yogasanas and pranayama, and see, whether any of them suffered from Parkinson's or cancers and so on. And we have sufficient number of teachers, and if you can show that none of them are affected, that's an initial thing, and then you can do other studies. So breathing is also connected to heart rate and blood pressure. I already told you about the sensors and so on. So when you are not getting enough oxygen, you will experience a host of symptoms. You would have seen that whenever you do a lot of exercise or fast running, your heart rate goes up, because there is quick depletion of oxygen and increased carbon dioxide. And so those chemo sensors, they give inputs and increases the heart rate. So the reverse should also be true, that if the oxygen increases and carbon dioxide decreases, then these chemoreceptors should give the reverse information and ask it, now you relax, man, there is enough, so you can reduce the heart rate and reduce the pumping force of the heart rate. So there is a paper in Journal of Clinical Investigation. It shows that hyperbaric oxygen, which means given oxygen more than the atmospheric pressure, forced oxygen, that reduces the heart rate. So once again, I have a conjecture that increased oxygen may give less pumping force and blood pressure can reduce. Another interesting connection between breathing or oxygen and cancer. Unfortunately, nobody talks of it, but this was a Nobel Prize winning work of a biochemist called Otto Warburg. You can just Google for his name and see his Nobel Prize talk. So what he said is that cancer basically needs a low oxygen environment to survive. He actually did experiments on rats, created cancer for two sets of rats. In one of them, he made sure that there is sufficient oxygen supply in all the tissues around the cancer region. In another set, he just left them to normal. And these things, the cancer progressed and they died. And the other set of this thing where oxygen was supplied around the cancer never grew. So he has clearly proved that oxygen has a very close connection to cancer. Of course, now doctors say that just by giving oxygen, it may not help. But the East European countries, you can again Google it, they use hyperbaric oxygen chambers to actually cure cancer patients. And there is also in US, they are doing studies now combining oxygen and carbon dioxide in different proportions. And that is tried as a treatment for cancer. So there are also things for people who are working on different foods
And when you eat enzyme deficient foods, the red blood cells are weakened and stick together in groups, and they cannot travel through smaller veins. This causes the body to have many anaerobic, that means low oxygen areas, that allows cancer to develop. So there is a big group working in US which is studying what kind of, just by controlling your diet, you can control your cancer. So the importance of pH level of blood. We already said normal pH, it optimizes the enzyme action and a healthy metabolism. Prolonged abnormal pH leads to disordered metabolism and illness. Observing a patient's blood and urine pH values aids assessment, diagnostics, planning, and implementing care and re-evaluating healthcare intervention. So this is what is mentioned in British Journal of Nursing. So when they are looking at patients, they are saying that you need to carefully look at what is the pH value of the blood and urine. So it has very important implications for health. Now, so you might have seen many times in India, in rural areas, whenever prohibition is suddenly, or even otherwise, the poor people, they make different types of concoctions using sometimes even battery acids and very many other things, and they call it hooch, and sometimes people are killed. They consider that it is due to methanol poisoning. So we think that it is only these uneducated people and poor people do that. So this is, you can see that such things are actually noise for the body, and I consider that as like the Ganges is polluted by the effluents from an industry. So these are what I call noise. So just as effluents are going into the Ganges and polluting it, you are polluting the body with undesirable things, which I call noise. But it is also done by very rich people. So a soft drink typically contains carbonated water and a sweetener and a flavoring and phosphoric acid. So you have already seen that carbonated water means basically it is carbonic acid, and the H plus concentration is high, which means pH is low and it is acidic. We have done experiments in the chemistry lab in IISc with all the popular soft drinks in India, and all of them have a pH value from 2 to 3. And if you look at the battery acid, it has a pH of 1. I told you that pure water has a pH of 7, and actually what we need is slightly above 7, but all the soft drinks have 2 to 3. So gulping down this carbonated drinks is equivalent to polluting the Ganges with either effluents or the refuse of people. Sorry to say that. And the statistics say that in 2003, I couldn't get the recent statistics, average American drank around 46 gallons of soft drinks. You can imagine what will be their immune level, what is happening. And this is again not proved. My conjecture is this is probably the cause for the very high incidence of colon cancer in the USA, because when it goes through the small intestine and large intestines, maybe the body will decide that this is junk and may not take it, but it is all the time there in the intestines, and that might give rise to colon cancer. That's my view. But again, I'm also saying that breathing, pranayama and meditation can actually change your destiny. So what do I mean by destiny? In the medical parlance, people say that your disease, your health, many of them are decided by your genes, your DNA. And if your parents and grandparents had a BP or sugar, or some actress removed her breast because her sister had breast cancer. Very unfortunate. So the latest discovery is not very recent. 2006 itself, in the Discover magazine, the title it says DNA is not your identity, which means you can go beyond your DNA. You can control your genes, not change the genes, but you can change the expression of the genes. So I may have a gene for BP or sugar or something else, but if that gene is not expressed, that means there is a soft switch. If the switch is on, it will express and I'll have the disease. If the switch is off, then I won't have the disease. There are also controls which are, graded controls, increase or decrease the amount of expression of the genes. And people have shown that your diet, your thoughts, your emotions, your stress level can alter the expression. It can switch or switch off, or it can modify the level of the expression of your genes. And not only that, once it is changed, that alteration is passed on to your descendants. They have done experiments on rats, and they have seen that even up to third generation it is passed on. Whether positively it's changed or negatively it is changed, it is passed on to your offsprings. So your past habits, your parents' past habits, and their parents' past habits are all switch on or switch off your gene expression until you modify it by, again, some of these methods. So I will skip this. This shows you, this is not some mumbo jumbo. So this is actually studied in many of the advanced laboratories now. And this slide I have taken from National Institute of Health, just to show you that they have already shown enough mechanisms how this epigenetic, that means the changes on the gene expressions, are happening through various things, including your diet. And this is a great man who actually took two identical, rats, genetically this thing that is twins, and just by changing he fed different things for them and changed their genetic expression of the genes, and you can see what happened at the end. One had a disease, another was very healthy, and he showed that just by changing the diets, of course this was an extreme case, you can actually change the way your genes express. So this John Mathers, professor of nutrition, Newcastle University, it is in British Medical Journal in 2016, he said that don't blame obesity on your gene. There is a gene they have found out, that FTO gene is causing the obesity for some people. So it is definitely, if you have that gene, you are likely to this. But he experimented with that with 9,500 people and said that in spite of the genes, if they are physically active, then they can lose weight. So there is some function of the genes, but you can go beyond the genes. And this paper, published in PLOS One in April 2013, it showed that the effect of pranayama and meditation can happen in just 2 hours of practice, and it can change the gene expressions. It's an amazing, unfortunately, I don't see many papers like this. I want to do these things, but I'm not very, knowledgeable in these areas, and we need a team to do this really exciting research. So what they showed is, there are 2 groups of 40 people. One group did yoga asanas, breathing and deep relaxation for 2 hours. And another group did, walking in the woods and listening to some music and all that. The yoga group, they showed that after 2 hours, they took the blood, and they also checked the blood before they do. 111 genes have changed their expression. And these genes are in the lymphocytes, which are the immune cells in the circulating blood. So powerful result. So it is extremely empowering to know that you get to shape not only your genes, but your kids and grandkids' genes as well, if you do these things. So epigenetics proves that it is never too late. Your genes are willing and able to unlearn bad habits and implement good ones, as long as you are willing. Genes are willing. Question is, your mind, is it willing? So I come to the end of the talk. These are my real desires. I wish I will see this before the end of my lifetime. I want these facts of how powerful is pranayama in the health of human beings introduced in our science texts. I don't remember to have read any of this in my school texts. Every child must know the importance of good breathing for the health of the body and the brain. How it is as important, if not more, as good balanced diet. How it is an amazing cardiac exercise. And the mechanisms behind Kumbhaka and Brahmari. And I clearly feel that it is much more important to study how many Panipat wars were there, how many brothers Aurangzeb killed before coming to power, or the names of the British Governor General, all junk, noise that we read. And other important thing I want to do is we need to introduce the concepts of positive health and how to improve immunity in the medical curriculum. I'm really feeling bad that no doctors are talking about these things in the current situation. We can't blame them. See, we know that our thinking is highly limited but by our knowledge. That is why you and I, most of us, we never talk about astronomy or general relativity. These are very complex concepts, and unless you have studied, you are experts in that, you will not even think about it. So our thinking is always around our knowledge level. And today's doctors don't get educated on how to improve the effectiveness of our immune system in a natural way, using yogasanas, herbs, pranayama, etc. So that's why when it comes to even vitamin C or D, they immediately think of tablets rather than Indian sweet lime or sunlight exposure, by which you can get it very easily. So there is an urgent need to revise a medical curriculum to include aspects of positive health and immunity. In fact, I feel we need to define indices of positive health, indices of good immunity. And in addition to what they are already studying, the allopathy actually means alleviation of disease. So currently the doctors don't come into picture unless you have a disease. So you can't get health from doctors. Only when you are going away bad health, then you go to the doctors. So I want doctors to actually deal with good health. So this is the last slide. My talk would have achieved its purpose if for the rest of your life, each and every one of you who are listening to this talk, you give importance to breathing as a very, very important input for your and your family's good health. And that will be the best way of achieving the goal of Fit India. Because in each of us, each of our family take care of our good health, the country will become healthy overnight. And that will be the key takeaway of this talk. I also invite like-minded people, researchers, engineers, doctors, industry people managing the corporate social responsibility funds to contact me if you think this research is important for humanity. We need to form a great team and really work on these exciting things and really benefit the humanity. So let's come out with a grand plan of research and embark on it. A lot of people I need to thank. Mainly I want to thank the audience because of you I'm here, and also the Center for Consciousness Studies, UMass. So now we'll go for questions. I will wait for your questions.